Hello and welcome to What Would Jesus Do? I am your host Tash, and I'm so excited to bring this podcast to you. For a long time I have wanted to start up this podcast again, but I didn't know what it was going to look like. I didn't know what it was going to sound like for a while, so I just did nothing, to be honest. I sat with it, I prayed on it for a long time, and now I finally feel like it's time to start sharing in ways that I haven't before. If you listen to my old podcasts, you'll know more about my journey. However, I haven't shared anything for a long time. I probably haven't shared, I think the last podcast episode went out in about February 2024. And if you follow me on social media, then you'll know that a lot in my life has changed since then. I feel like I've completely changed since then. I am not the same person that I once was. I can say that clearly. And since 2021, I've been on a journey back to faith, back to Christ. And I think it all started happening at the age of 33. I'm now 37. So yeah, we're talking four years ago, coming up 5 years, that my life has been completely flipped upside down and I have came out a brand new person. And I wanted to share a lot about that, and I also wanted to still bring in the essence of wanting to help people and support people and guide people in relationships, breakups, now being a married woman and sharing that story. But also ultimately I want to share how amazing your life can become when you realize that actually it doesn't need to be you who is in control of what happens. And for somebody who has spent the majority of their life attempting to control outcomes, that has probably been one of my biggest life lessons, is that God knows me so much better than I know myself, and he knows what is better for me than I know myself. And once I was able to hand over the reins to him and ultimately come back to my faith, I was able to see things so much clearer and live a life that feels so much more peaceful, that I feel so much more centered within myself. I know who I am, and I know that I know who I am because he tells me. And I know that if I ever question that, I know that I can go to him and I can find that in him. I know that whenever I face challenges in my life, or whenever things are happening in my life that I'm feeling either frustrated by or really challenged by, I have Jesus that I can go back to, and I can find the most amount of peace I've ever felt in my life. And I was actually having a conversation with a friend the other day, because we were talking about, as women, the amount of shame that we can sometimes carry from our past, from things that have happened to us in our past. And I was like, whoa, like I've just had a realization there that I don't carry that anymore. I don't carry any shame. And I think that's where I had a little bit of a light bulb moment, where I was like, actually, I am not the same person that I once was. And I was attempting to track back to find out where that had happened. And to be honest, I don't think it was one particular thing, although I think there was definitely a pinnacle moment for me where my life completely changed and I felt a new person. I felt like I'd been given a clean slate. I felt that I no longer needed to feel shame about things that happened in my past, because I was being given a clean slate. And that was on Easter Sunday this year when I made the decision to get baptised. I'm going to share more about how I ended up getting there from where I was, but I wanted to start off this new podcast with just an open conversation and to just share a little bit about where I'm at now, and to also share some of the things that have happened in my life that have been the biggest sort of shifts and changes as to the woman that I am today. And like I said, I think I started this journey back to Christ at the age of 33, so back in 2021. But actually take it back all the way to when I was born, back in 1988, and I was born into a Christian family. So I grew up with Christian values. I went to church with my parents and my brother. I went to Sunday school, did all of the things. I was very involved in church, and I had both of my grandparents very much went to church. My grandparents on my dad's side specifically were very much, I can only describe them as examples of people that when they're literally walking examples of what it looks like to live a life with God at the centre of it. Not only their lives individually, but their marriage as well. And it was such a powerful example for me to have as a young girl growing up and spending so much time around my grandparents and around my parents, who also had a God-centered marriage. I didn't really probably realise the impact of that until now that I'm 37. I was going to say 38 then, I'm like making myself older than what I am, but no, 37. I can actually see the impact that had on my life in both a positive aspect, but also an element that probably subconsciously felt like pressure, I guess, or an expectation that I wasn't sure that I could fulfill. And if you've listened to podcast episodes before, you'll know that I've been through quite a lot in my life in terms of relationships and going through sort of things that happened in my childhood that impacted how I viewed my relationships with men, and all of these different things that I want to really unpack throughout this podcast. But also I want this podcast to be about other people coming on and sharing their testimonies of them coming back to faith and coming back to Christ. And this isn't a podcast to preach or to add pressure onto anybody, but more to share the amazing things that can happen in your life when you have God at the centre of it. And I realise, because I've came out of New Age spirituality to coming back to Christ, as I've seen the confusion that can sometimes come from being in New Age compared to the clarity that I feel with God. And take away religion and, you know, the perception that we might have or that you might have of religion, because I understand it, because a lot of people, especially over the past couple of years that I've had conversations with as I've came back to faith, is that, you know, a lot of people have had bad experiences within the church. I've seen that so many times, and I've felt that from people, and I myself have experienced that. You know, I've spent time with people that are, you know, I'll put in air quotes, Christians, but that aren't an example of Jesus. And ultimately, when I explain my faith to people, it's that I want to live my life as close to Jesus as possible. And I ask myself probably multiple times a day, what would Jesus do in this situation? How would Jesus respond or react in these situations? And how can I come from that place of love to somebody? How can I show people forgiveness? And I can see so much more clearly now how I feel so much freer. But I can also see how people might perceive following God as being controlled. Whereas actually, I was explaining this to a friend the other day, you know, God does not want to control you. He wants you to feel free, which is why he gives us free will, but he gives us core values and morals to live by that can ultimately help us live peacefully, live from a place of love. And I think ever since I was a young girl, rather than having a connection with God, I would have a connection with Jesus. So my prayers would always be, "Dear Lord Jesus." And even throughout my life, when I've walked a different path, shall we say, that I've always still, in the times of challenge, I've always gone back to prayer. And even in the moments, I remember when I was deep in being in an abusive relationship, both abusive from somebody else, but also abusive to myself in terms of the how much I was abusing my body through sex, drugs, drink, the addiction cycle that I was in. And I was able to, I still felt this pull, and whenever things were feeling really challenging, to bring it back to Jesus and to pray and to ask him for guidance and help. And especially when I was going through challenges with my health, in hospital, or I was, going through sort of, I think it was maybe my 6th or 7th collapse lung, is that I would immediately go to Jesus, because I had that root foundation. So I understand that for people who maybe don't have that foundation because they've not grew up in a church or a Christian environment, I will say I was very blessed to have examples around me, even without realizing it. My parents, even though they stopped going to church for a while, beautifully over the past year, they've started to go back, and they found a place where they feel really accepted and really at home, and that feels really amazing to see that, and to see the work that God can do in your life. I'm aware that this episode is probably going to go a bit here, there and everywhere, so hang in there with me, because I am so grateful that for you listening to this, that you're open, or at least intrigued, I guess, or even maybe just a little bit nosy. I don't know, that maybe you want to just see where I'm at, because for a long time I've not shared things on social media, little snippets here and there of my life and where I'm at, but I've not shared half as much as what maybe I used to. So I feel like this is a good opportunity for me to start sharing, and to share with a openness and a honesty, but also with an awareness that you might not understand the journey that I've been on. That's okay. I want this to be a non-judgmental place. And I think for a long time, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of audio. I constantly sort of throw myself into listening to sermons, to inspirational people that I follow. And I find that a lot of them are American. I don't see or hear many podcasts of British people that are talking about their faith in a way that I can understand. And I felt the same way when I started my podcast before, is that I didn't feel there was a podcast that was just speaking from a place of, not being someone who had a large following, or not being someone who was expecting too much from it, or that maybe there wasn't that honesty or vulnerability with it, or it was constantly about interviewing other people or interviewing famous people. And I understand there's I don't get me wrong, I love listening to podcasts like that, but I want to hear people who sound like me. Like, I want to hear people who just get it, and who are maybe actually still on the journey with them, rather than I listen to a lot of people that way further than I am on my journey. I mean, I'm married to a man who is years further than I am on his journey with faith and his commitment to his faith and to living a life of an example of Christ. I know that I'm not there yet, and I'm not claiming to be there yet, but I know that I can say with my whole heart that I have never felt as much peace, and that amazing things happened in my life once I was able to and surrender my plan to God and say, you know what, I am going to trust you with all my heart, that whatever happens, I know that it's happening for me, and I know that you are at work, and I can see that and I can feel it. I'm not saying that with it, because I did that it was easy and that I didn't face challenges, because I definitely did. But when I did face challenges, I had something solid to fall back on. I had something solid to come back to. And I feel like that's something that a lot of us are missing. A lot of us can get caught up in our own perception of things and aren't able to take that sort of a bird's eye view look to change your perception, to actually realize, you know, when people act in a certain way or they do certain things, I'm not the judge. And again, I was having a conversation this morning with my husband as we were talking about you know, when other people make decisions in their life that maybe you don't agree with or that you don't think is the best for them. But at the end of the day, I'm like, all I want to do is show you love. I'm not the judge. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to maybe offer some guidance or wisdom where I think it's appropriate. But other than that, I'm here to listen and to encourage you to find what feels true to you and discover that yourself. And whenever I'm working with clients as well, I do exactly the same thing, because I want to always encourage them to not just listen to what I say is gospel or what I say is truth, because I also want to encourage them to discover it. Because I'm not sure that if, you know, when I was deep in my path of new age spirituality, how I would have handled if somebody had came up to me and said, well, what you're doing is wrong, and you know, that's not good for you, and I don't think that's right, because I don't think anybody is going to respond well to that. So ultimately, this podcast isn't here to tell you what to do, but I think it's a podcast that I want to share with people to be in any situation in your life. Will it be helpful or harmful to ask the question of what would Jesus do? Because I know for me, it's always been helpful. And even if sometimes I haven't got the answer straight away, or I don't 100% understand maybe sometimes, or doesn't come as quick as what I'd like it to, I do know that I'm able to sit back and respond to my friends, respond to my family, respond to my husband in a much better way that is helpful to our relationship, or the different relationships that I have, that it's so much more helpful than it is harmful. And I realise that there is a lot out there in the world at the moment around faith, around Christianity, and around religion, and you know, a lot of things that have been pushed onto people, or there's been a lot of pressure placed on people. And ultimately, I'm not here to do that. I'm here to, one, share my testimony of my own experience of how God has changed my life, to have a platform where other people, other regular people, can come and share their testimonies of how God has impacted their life and how their life has transformed since they've handed over the reins to God and ultimately put God on the throne of their life. And again, I was having a conversation with a client the other day that I was saying, you know, if if we spend most of our lives putting a person, as in, I'm talking about like a living person, as in a relationship. So either your husband, your boyfriend, your partner, or your parent, or anybody in your life, if you put them at the throne of your life, then you are then dependent on how they react or respond to you, what their moods are like. If they're having an off day, it might impact you, or even, with friends as well, because we can get codependency in friendships too. If we're putting all of our who we are on that person or on that relationship, and that is determining who you are and in this world, then I think you're only going to find that you're confused, or that you're not sure, or that you're one day you feel great, and then the next day you're like, I don't actually know, because how are they feeling? And I'm more thinking about how they're feeling, and then about how am I feeling, and that I'm impacted by their moods. Whereas actually having God at the throne of your life, someone that is steady, someone that never changes, that is always there for you, that can give you the most amount of peace you have ever felt in your life, that can encourage you to make better decisions for you, that ultimately designed you to be the most amazing, beautiful human being, and the world has then told you otherwise, or other people have came and told you otherwise, or the enemy has came and told you otherwise, that you are not that person, that you are not how God designed you. God designed us with free will, of course, so you can come into this world and you can go out and do whatever it is that you want to do, and it's up to you to do that. But I think if you don't have God on the throne of your life, at the center of who you are, I would have to question, where do you find your value? Where do you find out who you are? And if you are constantly attempting to find out who you are through relationships, through your parents, through your children, through anything, like through music, through what you watch on the TV, through anything else that is not God, I would have to question where that's coming from. And I would have to question, are you really going to find out the value of who you are from that? Because I know I searched a very, very, very long time throughout my whole life, probably from the age of 8 to 33, 34, being completely lost or attempting to fit into a box that had been created. Whereas actually returning to God has enabled me to actually find out I am who I am because he tells me who I am. And there can be so many different ways of people attempting to find out who they are, from personality tests to doing different spiritual practices, or engaging in different things or different religions, or different ways of finding out who you are. And believe me, I've been there, so I understand, because I spent a long time attempting to find out who I was. And I'm seeing it a lot with people, that there's a lot of confusion for people, and they actually don't know where they fit, and they spend a lot of their lives, like I did, looking for where they fit in this world, and looking for a place that, one, accepts them for who they are. But actually, I think a lot of the time they're letting the world tell them who they are. And it's almost like, because what I've seen is there's a lot of pressure for people to accept both their best and worst traits. For example, in personality tests, you will be told, that you're a really empathetic person. But then also you can get really angry or defensive in situations, and you let that define who you are. Or you can be quite stubborn, or that you don't handle change very well. And to me, I'm like, would God say that to me? Would God say to me that you're so stubborn, you don't like change, that you're not very good with change, or that you find uncertainty quite challenging? Because I don't feel like those words are coming from a place of love, and God is love. And if it's not coming from God, then I have to question where it's coming from. And throughout this series, I want to share more about that, because over the past 18 months, I have had the biggest awakening, I think, of my life, to realise that in the world, there is good and there is evil. There is God and there is the enemy. And it's up to us who we choose to listen to. And a lot of people, I feel, are listening to what the enemy is saying to them. And I think one of the biggest realizations that I've had is that not every single thought that I have is my own. And it took me a while to actually come to terms with that, because of where I was at the time, I was wanting to dissect every single thought that I had and believe that it was mine, and believe that it was coming from somewhere within me in my subconscious, or that I owned it. There was a belief that because I'd been through certain things in my life, that meant that that's how I was as a person. That I would really struggle in relationships, or that I would constantly attract abusive partners, or that I would constantly end up in relationships where I wasn't treated right. And that was all because of something that happened to me at the age of 8, and that defined me, and that I need to carry this shame and this guilt, and that I need to use these certain words to describe what happened to me, because that's what I need to do. Whereas when I quieten my mind and actually say, God, what would you say to me? And this is where I had one of my biggest, I didn't realise at the time that it was probably one of my biggest experiences with Jesus, when he sat down next to me. And you've got to have to bear with me, because I had this experience with Jesus at the age of 33, where he sat down next to me and he held my hand and he said, "You are my child and I love you." And at the time, I was very much in New Age spirituality. I was very much attending plant medicine ceremonies, going to all these different spiritual events, ultimately to find myself, because I was very lost and I was very vulnerable. But within that, there was a lot that, again, I want to unpack in this podcast as well, because there's a lot of deception there too. And I think if I'd have had the right people around me at that moment in time, there would have been a more encouragement to explore that actually Jesus was calling my name for a long time before I actually accepted that that's what was happening. I think it wasn't until I was 35, so it took me 2 years from that moment that I had the experience with Jesus to actually start to think and feel. I was like, I need to go back to church. I have no idea why, but I feel this deep calling that I need to go back to church. And I started to say to some of my friends, I was like, I feel like I need to go back to church. Don't know why, just feel like I do. And that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I'm going to delve into that again on a separate podcast episode, because I realise I've spoke about a lot of different things, but these are the types of things that I want to be talking about, that we're going to delve into more in depth, but also how this can really help you, one, understand where you are, give you a wider perception on things, and I pray a bigger understanding and maybe a more open, honest understanding, and also to hear somebody's testimony as well. And when I got baptised, I had to get up in front of the church and share my testimony, and it was the first time that I've actually openly shared things in front of the 100 people that I'd carried so much shame around for a very long time, and that ultimately then was lifted, and I was given this clean slate, and it was the most freeing experience that I've ever felt. And ever since then, I've been on a journey back to Jesus and building a relationship with him, to the point that then I feel that I can come and share with others as well. There is a deep sort of fire burning within me to share experiences and to share the word of God and how it can help you and how it doesn't need to feel like it's pressure. It doesn't need to feel heavy. It can give you the most freedom that you've ever felt in your whole entire life. And that's what I will say. And there was a scripture that I wanted to share actually before I end today's episode. And it's something that a beautiful sister in Christ shared with me on the day that I was getting baptized. And it was a very emotional day. I will share more about it in a future episode. But she shared with me, and it was a scripture from Proverbs 31:25. And it says, "She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come." And it was all about not fearing the future and being able to face that without fear, because you know that you have the Lord by your side and that you feel prepared for anything that life throws at you, because you have all of your trust and faith in Him. And it is the most freeing feeling to know that and to be able to handle life in a completely new way, and to be able to love so much more deeply than I ever have done, and also to be loved so much more deeply. I'm so honoured and feel so blessed to have the story that I do and have the testimony that I do, because I know that it is going to help other people, and I already know that it is helping other people because I've shared it, and I can see that it's giving people faith. And that is the one of the things that helped me was by listening to other people's stories of how they had so much faith in God to give them the life that they so wished for and the life that they desired. And one thing that was such a huge focus for me for such a long time was that I wanted the beautiful marriage. I wanted to meet the most beautiful man and have the beautiful story of how we met. And I knew that that was going to happen, and I had so much faith in God that that was going to happen. And I'm so blessed that I have that story that I will share in the coming episodes. But for now, I'm going to end today's episode there. I thank you so much for listening and for being open and for not having any judgment. And I encourage you to use your own discernment in things, and to be aware that there is dark and light, but that's not in you, that's outside of you, and that you don't need to carry it all within yourself. There's a lot of expectation that we need to accept both dark and light sides of ourselves, and I think we've got it wrong. I think that actually we are light. We might have had a lot of darkness put on us, but we don't need to accept that. And I think the lasting thought that I would like to leave with you is that you remember that not every single thought that you have in your mind is your own. Not every single thought that you have in your mind belongs to you. And I will share more about that over the coming episodes, but for now, I will leave it there. I hope you have the most beautiful day. God bless you for listening, and I am excited for you to be on this journey with me.